Circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, for all of us imprisoned, circle for release, circle for the planet, circle for each soul, for the children of our children. Keep the circle whole. Circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, for all of us imprisoned, circle for release, circle for the planet, circle for each soul, for the children of our children. Keep the circle whole. For the children of our children. Keep the circle whole.
Thank you, Rick and the choir. That's one of my favorite songs in our hymnal. I still remember the first time I learned it and sang it. It is good to be back with you here at All Souls today. For the past few years, I've been able to navigate my summer vacation to be here in Oklahoma for 4th of July weekend. As the 4th of July comes up every year, I have a little bit of internal struggle. Part of me squirms at what the flag means to many people. And another part of me is so grateful to live in this amazing country. In the midst of fireworks and patriotic music and the smell of cookouts, I often feel like we have two very different understandings of what's so great about this country that we share. One source of the difference of opinion has to do with some basic points of view. For some people, what makes America great is a sense of tradition and a static identity of who we were and are. It's a nationalism rooted in a particular understanding of history. For most of us, I think, though, that the thing that makes America great is a deep history of resistance and liberation. It's the breaking of tradition that makes us great. It's our insistence on adapting to new worldviews with new information. America isn't great because of what it was, but because it insists on emerging into something better generation after generation. I've written and delivered that sermon several times, the What Makes America Great sermon. I think most of us agree that it's about innovation and adaptation. This year, I'm thinking more about how that history of struggle unfolded. As we celebrate the good and reflect on some of the not so good pieces of history, what caused it to happen? What brought us to this peculiar year in this complex tapestry of cultures and beliefs? What's the story? Any story depends on some characters to move the plot forward, whether that's the Three Little Pigs or Jesus or Abraham Lincoln. When we hear a story, we tend to think of the actions of the main characters. For a very long time, this is the way we have understood human history. One grand story propelled forward by the actions of a very few major characters. In academic terms, it's called the great man theory. It's a 19th century idea about powerful actors making bold decisions. And that may come out of their charisma or their intelligence or their physical strength. The theory says that a few great people did it. That idea came around in 1840, but only 20 years later, a competing theory took its place. It pointed out that these so-called great men were products of their society. Their actions would be impossible without a whole culture that formed them and supported them. Since the late 1800s, serious students of history have pretty much replaced the great man theory with social history. Most of us, however, are not serious students of history. We're curious people who enjoy a good story. And when we look to understand history, especially American history, we look to the stories of influential individuals who made it all happen. It's so easy to get caught up in that way of seeing the world. The shortcomings are pretty obvious. The name itself is pretty offensive. If history is shaped by such significant individuals, don't you think at least a few of them would be women? And slowly we're coming to realize that some of those great figures don't fall so neatly in the category of man or woman to begin with. Transgender, gender non-binary, and gender non-conforming folks have played serious leading roles in civilizations, including our own. The great man theory just seems kind of antiquated. And the gender thing is really only the tip of the iceberg. Now, I think we all know that the history books are written by the winners. I learned that lesson in kind of a peculiar way, very close to here at an early age. Not only did I grow up attending this church, I grew up quite close to here in the neighborhood. So I spent a lot of time at Philbrook Art Museum. The collection has grown over the years, but their oldest and most permanent stuff is medieval art. And art created in those days was incredibly expensive. It was almost always commissioned by the church or very wealthy families. Looking at religious art from that time period, it's fun because you can typically tell who the characters are. They're recognizable by a few symbols. So the Virgin Mary is often dressed in blue. She usually has a covering over her head or a crown. John the Baptist is probably the easiest to recognize because he's always there with a lamb and his super long cross that looks like a walking stick. Sometimes, though, there are unidentifiable characters in these pieces of art. Even at the birth of Jesus, you get a couple of extra people. Those extra people that you can't identify, well, they're the people that commission the painting. They had themselves painted into the scenes of the Holy Family. It was the medieval version of Photoshop, I guess. That always astounded me as a young person, that they would have the ego to just inject themselves like that. It taught me how much power people with money have to influence art. It also taught me that the people who have the money are the ones who define how we see history. Whether it's in painting or in books, wealthy folks decide what gets portrayed. From their perspective, history was the story of great men who had, by their own actions, shaped the course of the world. The great man version of history is so wrapped up in its own self-obsession that it's blind to the more complicated, more impactful movements of entire communities and cultures. It serves to both exclude anyone who isn't a powerful elite, and it offers a distorted picture of the way things happen. Understanding history through the lens of human relationships is different for most of us. We humans are a lot more like schools of fish or flocks of bird than we like to think. It can be discouraging on an individual level, like we didn't make all these choices in our lives. Maybe you come to realize that getting up this morning and coming to church wasn't completely a choice. Maybe the circumstances of your life propelled you to this moment and this decision. Sure, you could have decided to do something different, but coming here this morning is what made sense to you. The circumstances of your life propelled you to be here as much as any choice that you made. You could see that as disempowering. You could also appreciate the fact that your decisions now rest in an intricate network of relationships with other people. I think about this every time someone asks me about my calling to ministry, why I chose this kooky profession. When I meet people and tell them I'm a minister, they often want to know why. And often I find that they expect some dramatic story of revelation in the wilderness. My story's not an exciting one, though. After being very involved in church as a young person, ministry was the very clear, logical next step. There was no conversion experience or sudden realization. It was just the next step down the road that now seems like it had been clearly laid out a long time ago. That used to feel inadequate to me. I hadn't chosen or earned it in a way. Now, though, I'm learning to be grateful for the stream of history I am a part of. I didn't land here in life on my own. I'm grateful for a history shared by my parents and this community. It's a history that embraces scientific learning and compassion for the marginalized. It's a history of liberal religion that strives to choose hope and find wonder in life. Not by avoiding questions, but by diving into them. Being a part of this religious movement is not entirely my choice. It's a tremendous gift, though. I am glad that circumstances of your life brought you to be here today. I'm spending so much time this morning talking about this odd great man theory of history because it's kind of pernicious. It's not just a perspective of elite folks. We too have mistakenly understood history as a story enacted by a few leaders. I've lived in California now for about 14 years. It's a very different place. And I hope I never grow accustomed to how ideologically insulated that state can be. People there were kind of dumbfounded by the Trump presidency. It seemed to them as if some impossible magic trick had made this all happen. I try to remind them that he was elected by a whole bunch of people. And yes, there was some very careful strategy involved. But he also spoke a message that people agreed with. Like every other leader, he is as much a symptom of the wider culture as he is a cause. I also believe, and what I want us to remember most today, is that the same intricate network of everyday human beings can also change history. Too often, we've understood liberation movement as the act of individuals with courage. We turn to the heroes of Dr. King and Rosa Parks and Gandhi and Susan B. Anthony, Harvey Milk, Frederick Douglass, Cesar Chavez, and a long list of others. We lift them up on pedestals, give them praise, and we forget that they too emerged as products of their community. They emerged from communities of brave people who chose hope and to struggle for a better world. They simply gave voice to a stirring of the spirit. A few years ago, I was in New Orleans for General Assembly. General Assembly is our national meeting of Unitarian Universalist Association. Every year, a few thousand people gather to attend. I imagine a handful of you have probably been there. It's like most large conventions. There's an exhibit hall with lots of stuff to buy. So on my last day in New Orleans, pretty dazed from a few days of workshops and lectures, I wandered through this exhibit hall. I didn't really intend to buy anything. Amid the hundreds of bumper stickers and t-shirts and pins and coffee mugs, a poster caught my eye. The poster now hangs in my office. It contains the mugshots of 328 freedom riders who were arrested in Jackson, Mississippi. There are no mugshots of the first riders because they never made it to Jackson. In 1961, over 400 African American and white young people played a pivotal role in the civil rights movement. Riders used nonviolent tactics to desegregate dozens of bus depots, train stations, and airports from Virginia to Texas. And it was scary, violent. They faced fire bombings of their buses, brutal beatings, and imprisonment in Mississippi's infamous state penitentiary. In a lot of ways, their bravery makes them heroes. U.S. Congressman John Lewis is on that poster, but the remaining 327 names are completely unfamiliar to me. And that's why I absolutely love this poster. It's a reminder that thousands and thousands of people were on the front lines of the movement. Each of those freedom riders had their own networks of family and friends and faith community that supported their bravery and courage and mended their wounds. It's precisely the anonymity of their faces that brings a deep sense of hope every time I look at it, because it reminds me that the power to change the world is with us and our network of loving relationships. The politicians and influencers we read about in the newspaper make for a good story, but so do the three little pigs. A movement is a group of people changing the world, not an ideology espoused by a leader. Yes, leaders emerge here and there when the conditions are right, but leaders are not the ones who make the history happen. The Underground Railroad was more than Harriet Tubman or some really courageous enslaved individuals. It was a network built on trust and sacrifice. Stonewall wasn't a single brave queer person that stood up to the police. It was a riot. A community that knew and loved each other through years of mutual support, trust building, and secret protecting. They fought back together. Liberation grows out of cooperation, not individualism. We're best able to carve out a loving place in the world through working hand in hand with people. One of the interpretations of universalism that I appreciate best is the reminder that we are bound together in this world, all of us. Our liberation Mine and yours are tightly bound. We are on this journey together, so that your salvation is bound up in mine, and mine in yours. It means that I need you, and you need me. It's an incredibly vulnerable thing that we don't say very often as adults. But we know it's true. Our individualist culture doesn't often allow us to be real about how much we need one another, politically and spiritually. As the hymn goes, circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, for all of us imprisoned, circle for release. I need you, and you need me, and that is okay. The spirit of life stirs in loving relationships. God's healing power emerges as we heal one another's wounds and hearts. We may not be able to immediately change the world like great men, but together, through our relationships, we find the courage and the faith to keep the movement of love pushing forward one more day. Amen.
Amen to that. Thank you for joining us. For 100 years, All Souls in Tulsa has been a beacon of this free faith. We offer our services and programs freely online for all those who are interested. You can help us to do this by making a one-time gift today or a reoccurring pledge. We really appreciate you joining us and being a part of helping us make All Souls in Tulsa what it is. Thank you.